two dates in 2022 seem certain to be etched forever in geopolitical history. The first is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The second is the Biden administration's announcement of semiconductor restrictions on China on October 7th of 2022. Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. Stick around as we break down the world of semiconductors, how China's semiconductor game is strong, and what the United States might need to do about it. The Biden administration stated China would use Western chips for military development, and not supplying them directly to China maintains US superiority over China in semiconductors. They mandated that US semiconductor companies couldn't send chips and the tools to produce them above a certain technological pedigree. But Huawei's new 5G chip phone Mate 60 Pro, which some analysts predict is less than a year behind Apple's, shattered the West's perception of hegemony over advanced semiconductors. A year after initial restrictions, the Biden administration implemented stronger semiconductor restrictions. Let's look at why China's semiconductor industry recovered so quickly. The hole in US technology export restrictions lie in the fact that they only hindered the export of semiconductor tools that produce a certain nanometer level or below, more specifically referring to very advanced chips. Therefore, less advanced chips are fine and dandy. Thus, despite the restrictions, China can still import less advanced semiconductor manufacturing tools due to the existence of what the semiconductor industry calls CAPEX recycling. Gregory C. Allen, director of Wadhami Center for AI and Advanced Technologies, explains, nearly all semiconductor manufacturing equipment that can be used to produce 10 nanometer and below chips can also be used to produce less advanced 14 nanometer and above chips, and vice versa. US companies follow US regulations and deliver less advanced 14 nanometer and above manufacturing tools, but China can simply relocate those tools to manufacture advanced 10 nanometer and below chips. Due to US regulatory oversight, China's semiconductor manufacturing grinds on, despite Western semiconductor restrictions. Aside from exploiting technological loopholes, the second reason China's semiconductor industry has recovered so quickly is because they've been able to get their hands on Western technology. The first way China wrestles intellectual property from Western countries lies in legal courts. Recently, China has barred EU companies like Swedish telecom equipment maker Ericsson AB from suing to protect their patents in courts outside China, giving China a better chance of accessing that technology. Second, China convinces foreign employees to join them, bringing their semiconductor expertise and designs with them. Dutch newspaper NRC reported that a former ASML employee was accused of bringing trade secrets about advanced chip-making equipment to Huawei. If China manages to recruit a process engineer, or someone who specializes in integrating Western semiconductor tools to create these semiconductors themselves, China's ability to integrate technology and produce advanced semiconductors would skyrocket, despite these restrictions. Western organizations have failed to protect the intellectual property of semiconductor companies, and thus China's ability to manufacture semiconductors has skyrocketed. The Chinese government has never been timid to splurge money at home and abroad, marking the third reason why China has recovered rapidly despite Western technological restrictions. A report released by the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy declared that while Washington's export control measures on chip-making equipment and technology to China would pose major roadblocks for China's manufacture of semiconductors, these controls would also spur Beijing to pursue equipment self-reliance. After the announcement of semiconductor restrictions, Chinese leader Xi Jinping increased rhetoric involving self-reliance and strength in science and technology. Chinese leaders recognize that Western companies have a head start in semiconductors. Western export restrictions acted as a wake-up call to Beijing. If there is a further global escalation or conflict, their ability to produce semiconductors lies in peril. China has acted on its ignited fears. Between 2021 to 2022, China invested $290.8 billion into semiconductor projects. This single year of investment overshadows the US's CHIPS and Science Act by more than 5-fold. Now let's talk about EUV lithography equipment. It's currently being monopolized by ASML and unavailable to China. In the most recent round of investment totaling $40 billion, China committed the majority to developing lithography equipment for semiconductors. Researchers at Tsinghua University use particle accelerators to create a laser source, and according to a report in Hong Kong's South China Morning Post, the Chinese government pursued plans for creating a large-scale semiconductor lithography equipment factory based on this technology. If this comes to pass, it opens the way for China to independently produce advanced semiconductors at the 2-nanometer level. With fast progress in advanced nanometers and independent capability to produce 7-nanometer chips, China may historically lag behind the West, but renewed and unrelenting Chinese investment propels China to the heels of Western capability. Next, let's look at the question, what should the US strategy be when it comes to China's rise when it comes to semiconductors? One thing remains certain when it comes to Chinese semiconductor sanctions. The Chinese government will dedicate all means necessary to achieve self-reliance by crook or hook and will eventually achieve its goal. China feels unwilling to rely on the West for semiconductor technology, as it contradicts their national security. Thus, the US will gain nothing by removing all semiconductor restrictions on China. Now, another approach is to engage in an all-out Western coalition of technological restrictions. But since China will undoubtedly achieve semiconductor self-efficiency, whether that be through loopholes, coercion, or investment, the plan would backfire. The plan would just strain ties with China and hurt the revenue of Western companies more drastically. The best course of action is to revise the current US strategy. The current US approach to China lies in no man's land. US restrictions fail to stunt China's semiconductor development, but simultaneously reduce Western semiconductor companies' sales to China. A drop in revenue and a decline in research and development for the next generation of chips follow. Robert D. Atkinson, president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, explains, restrictions lead to a death spiral for Western semiconductor companies. Less revenue, less money invested into next generation semiconductors, fewer sales for the next generation chips, leading to another reduction of sales, and so forth. To guarantee their survival and innovation of its semiconductor companies, the West can revise its export restrictions and tariffs. First, when China can simply produce a certain level of semiconductors, imposing or threatening export controls spurs the substitution of Western equipment with Chinese equipment. The US should revise the extent of semiconductor export controls. It should only be on items the Chinese are incapable of producing soon. Once the Chinese get close to that production capability, the relevant export controls should be relaxed. There lies no point in restricting US companies from selling 7-nanometer chips in China for profit when Chinese companies can already produce those 7-nanometer chips. The US must let its companies compete with Chinese companies to prevent the aforementioned death spiral. However, allowing them to compete is not enough. The US must actively support companies by imposing tariffs on Chinese semiconductors and subsidies for US companies, so US companies do not lose market share and have an easier time making profits. The consequences of not doing so would be the death spiral, stunting US innovation and self-reliance. Furthermore, increasing high-skilled worker immigration and STEM education within the US, especially around quantum computing and artificial intelligence, would go a long way in maintaining US superiority in semiconductors. The US-China relationship is not great. It will be hard to fix the fundamental lack of trust between the two countries. However, the US can maintain semiconductor self-reliance by imposing a combination of export restriction adjustment and tariffs on Chinese semiconductor companies. Although the US broke ground on technological restrictions on October 7th of 2022, its most important decisions may be yet to come. Thank you for listening, and I'd appreciate any feedback you have in the comment section.